Okay, I'll call to order the Tuesday, June 25th, 2019 regular board meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Southgate's mission statement is Learning for Life. Vision statement is Southgate Community Schools, best choice for students and parents. Now I will entertain a motion on the agenda, if anybody would like to make one.
I'd like to add a revision to that.
Okay.
I'd like to add number 1 to the presentations on F. It's a Jill presentation.
Ahead of the budget?
Yes,
Is that where it's going? Okay.
thank you.
So now we have a 1 and then a 2. What is it?
It's a presentation from Jill.
Oh, okay. Superintendent presentation. Any other revisions?
No.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion on the revised agenda.
Make a motion to approve the revised agenda as presented.
Okay, a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Lamas. Any discussion on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. And we have an agenda. First on the agenda is citizens' comments. Anybody who would like to speak tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment and move on to the superintendent presentation.
So it is my pleasure to present the June 2019 Employee of the Month to Teresa Grahowski. She has been the champion for our move to Davidson. Besides purging and taking care of her own office, she has organized her storage room and oversaw setting up the new storage over with Jacob. She's also organized and did hours of filing in the payroll office. She's packed the front lobby, the conference room, the mail area, and yet another storage area. She regularly communicated with Jacob to move parts of our office over the last few weeks, including bookshelves, file cabinets, divider walls, and she has really helped to make this move as painless as possible. If you don't know, we are officially moving on Thursday with a moving company, but tomorrow, technology is going to be there about 3 o'clock to get our computers, and then followed by Jacob and his crew to get the rest of the boxes before the moving company just moves the furniture. So we are going to be in comfy clothes tomorrow as we're packing up the last of our things. Some of us are living in 2 different offices, so we're driving back and forth to Davidson, and I can't tell you how many loads Teresa has loaded into her own vehicle and taken over to Davidson. So it is my pleasure to give Teresa Grahowski Employee of the Month for June.
Board photographer here. 1, 2, 3, 1 more.
Oh, Chris came all the way back.
I'm gonna say what you're here for.
It is. I tried to get a hold of today, I'm sorry.
It's hard to pull
All right.
one over on the person who sets the agenda out. So
It
yeah.
is, and I just wrote a little note to,
Yeah,
I
she
just,
gave me that
I just didn't tell her.
It's not on the agenda. Yet another oversight on my part.
There you go.
So I do have to tell you that it was unanimous central office just because of everything she's been doing. So it was a pleasure to do that.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Thank you.
Okay, it takes us to the 2019, 2020 original budget presentation.
Go on the old thing.
The light with
Yes,
the
just
white.
till it beeps.
I was waiting for this.
Push it because it takes up a minute to warm up. There you go.
Thanks for providing us a copy so we don't have to break our neck looking.
Welcome. Oh, here it comes. Oh, I think that's still kind of, is
It's
it going to
coming.
brighten up anymore?
It's coming.
Yeah, Pop.
Okay, that looks good. Good evening. I'm happy to present a little bit more detail for you on our 1920 original budget. And I started off with a summary of the page that, the one page, almost like a resolution page that you all received, I think it was last week. This is going to summarize that a little bit more and hopefully give you a little bit more detail. The ending fund balance at June 30th of 2019 per our amended June 11th, 2019 budget was $1,727,587. And obviously does not look great, but the ending balance I'm projecting at the end of June 30th of 2020 is $1,009,729. There's a lot of reasoning for why this is happening, and I think I've outlined that in further slides. It is a decrease to our fund balance of $717,858, and I've listed what we expect total revenue to be, $38,792,504, and total expenditures of $39,510,362. Let me just see. Some of the changes in the general fund revenue are listed here to local sources. As you can see, the largest drop is in state sources, and this is basically due to a drop of 200 students projected. The biggest problem with this budget, and every school district in the state right now is facing this, is that we don't have a governor's budget. And they are still in disagreement over that, and I'm sure you all are following every day the latest trends. The most recent information that Jill got was that the governor and the House are saying 180. In my budget, I projected 69. That was a recommendation from the MSBO to be extremely conservative, but it's looking like the minimum we would get would be the 180, since the governor and the House are in agreement and the Senate is actually looking at 275, which would be fantastic. So we don't have a lot of change in federal sources right now. Other sources are going to be like our transfers in and indirect cost. And there are the bottom lines there. Our amended budget at June 30th, June 30th of 2019 projected in the amended budget is $40,287,590. And in the original budget for next June 30th of 2020, I'm projecting $38,792,504. That's a decrease of about $1.5 million. If you took 200 students times our current foundation of 71, it's over $1.5 million right there. But we were able to make up some of that.
Through the chair, can I ask a question?
Uh,
Would you rather wait? I can
Yeah,
wait.
yeah, let's hang on to the
Okay,
questions
all right, that's
until we get it presented, because this is a hearing that we have to have on the budget,
Yeah.
so the first is the
No problem.
presentation, then we can go through the questions.
All right, so the next slide is talking specifically about the changes in the general fund revenue, and I basically stated that I've assumed $69 per pupil increase in state and foundation and a loss of 200 FTEs. Our foundation for 2018-19 was $7,871 per student, And if I add the $69 in for FY 2019-2020, that becomes $7,940 per pupil. I've also included 35 23A students, which are the dropout recovery students. We also get full foundation for them. But the net decrease to the state aid would have been $1,574,200, and then that's offset by the increase in the $69 per pupil, which is only $227,700. So it makes a net decrease of $1,346,500. I have a increase of $277,900 in state funding, and that's kind of a recap of what I set up in the earlier paragraph. The Dropout Recovery Program, again, is based on 35 students. I assume that our regional enhancement money would be slightly less. I used the $1,193,291, which is what we received in current year funding. We also received about $200,000 in delinquent millage funds that I did not include for next year to accommodate for the drop in our pupils, because we will get a less proportionate share. The operating level for our non-homestead millage is continuing at 18 mills. No changes there. And then the transfers in from our cafeteria fund happily are not going in the wrong direction. We're looking at least $39,227 coming in to the general fund, and the indirect costs for community services fund, $35,317. And I'm estimating the special education fund indirect cost transfer in of $300,000. This next slide shows a breakdown by the required categories in our state budget, with our state in our budget, and it just lists out what our amended budget was for June 30th of 2019, and then what I'm proposing the original budget will be for the 2019-2020 year. Overall, the expenditures have decreased by $1,094,544, and there are several reasons for that, which I will talk about in an upcoming slide. And it looks like our basic programs are where we have the biggest decrease, which is all of our instructional areas, our elementary, middle school, high school, and summer school is in that category, I think. Okay, so the changes in the general fund expenditures are $301,817, a reduction in wage benefits for 3 staff layoffs, plus 1 voluntary layoff. They happen to be newer employees at the lower step levels. So it's not quite as much as you might think for 4 individuals. The employee severance plan that was entered into last year is at a general fund cost of $258,872, and this is year 2 of year 3 in 2019-2020. We've had increase in staffing costs and retirement costs per each collective bargaining agreement, and a $288,000 increase in retirement costs based on a 1.52% increase in the state retirement level to 39.91. For 18-19, it was 39.29%. There is, in this budget, a reduction in curriculum and maintenance costs from the enhancement funds of $350,000. $45,000 savings for the central office rental of facilities, which we will no longer have. And the $54,364 additional cost savings for our payroll, which is contracted for an entire year. It began in January of 2019, so we would realize about $54 $364 by that service being contracted to Wayne Risa. Okay. Then moving to the special education fund revenue, I have also broken this down by the required sources, local, state, federal, the County Millage Act, Act 18 funding. And I'm not showing for 2019, 2020, any incoming transfers. One of the points I'm going to make in the next slide is our transfers are currently being reviewed by Wayne County RISA's deputy superintendent. So these figures are potentially will change after they've been reviewed. In the next amended budget. So the changes overall, based on the budget submitted to Wayne County RISA in February of 2019, have been approved. So the expenditures and revenue that you will see have all been approved already. Federal sources, there's not really a change. The county millage money is going to increase due to an increase in the program costs. And as I said, the transfers are currently being reviewed by Wayne County RISA Deputy Superintendent. As far as the special education fund expenditures, the largest increase here seemed to be outgoing transfers. That, again, is related to the transfers being reviewed by the Deputy Superintendent of RISA. We have had also the second largest area was instruction. And again, the increases there were due to the collective bargaining agreement increases in staff wages and benefits. So overall, based on the budget that was, again, submitted to RISA in February in 2018 and approved, the changes in instruction, pupil services, and school administration are due to staff wage increases per the collective bargaining agreements and the employee benefit changes. And also, there is one social worker that has been added and approved in this budget. The rent costs remain unchanged at $102,000. The indirect costs continue to be 12% of total allowable direct costs. And again, the transfers are currently being reviewed by the Wayne County Deputy Superintendent. Food service, projected fund balance at June 30th of 19 is 0. And I also project the fund balance at June 30th of 2020 at 0. And that is because the amount of transfer back to the general fund is not the maximum that we can take. So I'm projecting $39,227 to go back into the general fund, whereas we could have taken $71,329. And in fact, that figure is off. Before I walked down here, I got the final rates, and it went up to 11.75. So it would be slightly even more than 11.46. Our food costs are at the industry standard of 40%. And one of the other things, it was new this year in 18-19, but we'll have a full year in where our 4 elementary, Asher and Beacon, students receive free breakfast.
And lunch.
Oh, and lunch, pardon me. Okay. And the changes in the revenue are mainly in local sources for food service, and that's the money that the students actually pay in. Our state sources slightly decreased. We did have a nice boost in the federal sources, and that is the money that's billed for breakfast and lunch, and that was a very large increase over 17-18. I didn't project it too much higher for 19-20. Again, with this whole entire budget, I've been extremely conservative, trying not to project too much revenue until we know and get some kind of an answer. The changes in the food service expenditures are, we have a decrease in wages, and that's primarily from not having an employee that is the director. That cost is moved down to payments to other districts for $38,500. And the benefits also decrease for that same reason. Purchase services are about the same, supplies are roughly around the same, and there's not a whole lot of change, other than they're making enough money to support the expenditures. Next is the Community Service Fund, which is made up of latchkey, preschool, and adult enrichment. And preschool is new this year. It has moved from the general fund into the Community Service Fund, and it is self-supporting within that fund. We have had a slight decrease in tuition, looks like from a drop in enrollment. And summer tuition also seems to have declined by $10,000. The preschool tuition, I forecasted just a little bit of an increase on that for next year. The adult enrichment tuition, I've noticed a decline. It's down about $10,000 from 17-18, and then an additional, I'm projecting an additional $6,000 down for next year. Oh, and I neglected to say, some of that money from the tuition up under latchkey has been broken out and moved down under the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Department of Human Services tuition. So it comes from the state funding, which is about 19 in total. Okay, and I think I'm mentioning some of that on this next slide, that the revenue has a slight decrease, partially because the revenue has been moved to another category. The preschool program moved into this fund, and the enrichment money has a decrease, so basically a recap. Other changes to the Community Service Fund expenditure, they have, for latchkey, decreased, preschool has decreased, adult enrichment has decreased, which you would expect, and then for the outgoing transfers, that is the indirect costs that will move to general fund. The last couple of slides are the brand-new student/school activity fund, and that is a result of new guidance from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Their number 84 is regarding custodial fiduciary funds. And what that is, some of the funds that are sitting out in our trust fund and in our student activity funds will now be known as special revenue funds or governmental funds. So we had to include a budget for that for 1920. It goes into effect July 1. The problem is, this is another area where we don't have compliance information yet on the audit standards. So there's a lot of discrepancies when you ask the different agencies how this should be handled. So the quick fix at this point, we were told, was to include a budget as a total, so total revenue, total expenditure of the items that you think you're going to move over. And then when you have a chance to go through very thorough documentation and standards of reviewing each of those former student activity accounts, then you will make your decision on opening up each account number and moving them into this special fund. The biggest thing about this, which is creating a lot of issues, is that the funds will now be in the general funds, basically. Governmental funds are treated the same way. And there are certain purchases that are considered unlawful by a governmental unit, and these funds that get moved will now have to fall within that area. This brings about a lot of legal implications. They've had lawyers sitting on all of these committees trying to make decisions, and we still don't have uniform guidance yet. So when you look at the page that has, I think it's page 18, this last page, I have the revenue. Local sources is basically the money that's moved out of our old student activities fund, or will be moved out, what I'm projecting, and then the expenditures are all going to be other, and they're the same amount in and out. And then the fund balance associated with those funds was $123,761, which brings the total down to the total available to appropriate of $185,433. So that's it. Short and
Okay.
sweet.
Before we have the board ask any questions, we'll open up a public comment since this is a public hearing for the budget. And we'll see if the public has any comments, and then we'll get on to the board questions. So, is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak on the public hearing for the budget tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment for the budget hearing, and then we'll allow the board to ask questions of staff. So, Dr. Pomponi.
Hi, so the net decrease in fund balance, is that with the millage funds in there for the 5%?
For the general fund?
Yes.
Yes, it includes the enhancement money. And I'm sorry, what's the second part of your question?
With the 5% balance that we need to have so we're not going to have the 5%?
That's correct. Well, with this budget, again, being extremely conservative, I calculated 4.92%.
For next year?
For 1920.
So we're at 5% to end this year.
No, we're at 6%.
Oh, we're good.
From my budget calculations,
From the
yes.
calculations right now, we're good this year, but we're
Yes.
going to be slightly under next year if
Yes.
this holds true.
Yes.
So we can still make changes and
Yes.
adjust before, okay. The other thing that I wanted to mention with the transfers and the budget, for the viewing audience, can you mention what the transfers are that are explained in the budget?
In the general fund?
Yeah.
Yes. For the incoming transfers or both outgoing?
Both.
Okay, the incoming transfers, I'm going to pull that up. That should be our indirect cost. Oops. Want to pull up. Trying to find my slide so I can get to.
It's either page 2 or 3, depending if you titled page 1, the original title page.
This is the 374, is that what you're looking at?
Right.
Here it is. I'm trying to pull up my great big spreadsheet that gives all of the detail. Okay, so incoming transfers are VOCED payments, our DCTC wish list items, our DCTC carryover, our Follow That Kid money, regional enhancement money. I'm sorry, this is all other sources. And you said you only wanted to know the transfers?
Transfers.
Pardon me. Okay, the special ed program, center program is the 300,000 indirect cost. The transfer in from cafeteria of 39,227, and the transfer from latchkey of $35,317. That's $374,544 incoming revenue. And as far as the expenses, it would be,
May I say something about indirect costs? So, last year, we sat in a budget presentation with food service being projected to be in a deficit, and we did bring in a new food service director who has managed to not only turn that deficit around, but has projected to bring some indirect cost back to the district. We have not fully received all of the grant funds for the breakfast in the classroom, which will, I believe, significantly increase that. And I am positive that we'll be able to maximize our indirect costs next year, just watching Mark Rodriguez and what he's done to food services this year. So Barb was extremely conservative, but that's another
Did we transfer anything last year from food services? I know it was projected to be in a deficit, but I can't remember if we transferred any amount.
We did, and I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was between $30,000 and $40,000.
So about what we're doing this year.
Correct.
Okay.
But I could be wrong, because I'm not looking at it.
That seemed like a familiar number.
We
to me.
exhausted the
Was it
fund
was about
balance
half of
last
what
year.
we could have. Right,
That's-
but it was about half of what we,
That's my
had
recollection.
they had the money we could have brought in. Okay.
So the transfers in the expenditure end of it are transfers to the Special Education Center program that we owe from 2 years ago, $400,030, and a transfer to the debt fund to cover our bond payments.
Thank you. I have one other question. I don't know if you wanna-
Go ahead.
But just to clarify for the free breakfast and lunch sites, was that the grant that, or is that?
So we
something
received a grant from United Way to pay for approximately $2,000 per building. That includes portable coolers, carts, and some buildings needed refrigeration for the new milk and things. So that equipment unfortunately was back ordered, and it came in right at the end of the school year. So we'll be able to utilize that equipment going forward right in September.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President. Mr. Lammeth, I had him next.
You mentioned at the beginning the amounts that we're expecting for changes in per pupil funding from the state. You mentioned the House number, a Senate number, and the governor's number.
Yes, the governor projected 100, or asked for 180. The House last said 180 increase, and the Senate said 275. So they're,
It's 190, I thought. I thought the governor asked for 190 plus, and the House asked for 190.
And 270, I
And
think.
270 for the Senate. I just saw it the
So
other day.
the governor's is the most complicated because it's a weighted formula. So for example, if you have some English learners, you get a percentage. If you have some at-risk students, you get some more money. And if you have some
I see.
special education, you get some weighted formula. So when you clicked on her budget when she released it, and you clicked on Southgate, it estimated us at $495, which is extremely on the high side, per pupil in her weighted formula for Southgate.
Well, that would be nice.
All right. And then one more question for now anyway. You mentioned several times that you made some assumptions on your projections. Can you help me understand, or us understand, what some of the assumptions were, and how did you arrive at a number that you felt, because you were trying to be conservative?
yes.
How did you arrive at a number or a methodology or a model to get there?
Amount of the increase,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
the students, or,
For any of the projections that you were making, can you give us an idea of how you made that decision?
well, for the drop or decline in our students, I got that information from Ms. Pastor, which was 200, and then 35 for the 23A students. So I had my number, and then I took the $69 increase that was recommended by the MSBO, because I knew for sure it would be beneath what we were going to get. So I wanted to be extremely conservative. Unfortunately, that doesn't paint a very good picture when you're
Right.
not getting, your full foundation allowance. I did not increase taxes very much either, and that's tied into our state aid. I fully plan to have everything, by the time everything is approved for the October budget, through the governor's budget, I'm assuming by October 1, a great big assumption, that it will be in place on October 1, and be able to dive right into getting the amendment. That'll be in the works from the beginning of the school year. I'm not going to wait, and as soon as I get that information, we'll come back to the board with an amended budget.
Okay, thank you. And one last question on the slide that is titled Changes in General Fund Expenditures.
Yes.
There is a, the fourth bullet, 288K increase in retirement costs based on a 1.52% increase.
Yes.
And then it says total rate 39.91%. Can you?
That's the retirement rate that we pay on each dollar that a person earns.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Do we have the flat cap on the retirement?
Just, well, this would be it, the state puts out what they consider a variety of rates depending on the type of plan that you have.
Okay.
But the average that we use or could be charged at is the 39.91%. Unless you're in something like the personal health care, I think there's additional, like a surcharge on that, like 1 or 2%.
Okay,
The
thank
the
you.
39.91% is a percent of what? Of the,
Wages,
of all of our wages, right?
Yes.
Of anybody who's in the retirement program at the state.
any employee, if we pay them, they have to have retirement coming out and going to the ORS.
Right, if
Office of
they're,
Retirement
yeah,
Services.
if they qualify for, because we have some employees that don't qualify, right? Like,
No.
part-time employees or,
Well, there are some wages that are not reportable, they call it. And it would be certain stipends, but, maybe some retirees, but in general, each and every employee, there's a retirement cost to their wages.
and that's multiplied right across our, that's multiplied right across our wages that we're paying out. So this 1.52 is the state's increase. That doesn't represent the increase that we gave to
The
contracts.
1.52 is the state's increase in their total retirement rate, like this year was 38.29. We bump it up a little bit to be on the safe side. And so with that increase, now we're at 39.91% of each dollar that an employee makes.
But the 288, does that represent,
The increase,
that
I'm sorry.
represents the increase, not
Yes.
the total amount?
Oh, yes.
And that's multiplied across the increases that were given contractually.
Yes.
Was that done before? So those numbers, are those numbers represented here?
Yes. I did take the collective bargaining agreements individually, each person's increase and new step for next year. So when I calculated the retirement rate and the FICA rate on them, it was at the new rate.
Okay. All right, I was kind of piggybacking off of your question, so. Mr. Green, I had you next.
Well, one of them's already been answered. I mean, I could be wrong, but I was asking about what the proposals were from the House, the Senate, and then the governor's weighted proposal, because I thought it was a little higher than it was. So you projected $69 increase at a
Yes.
very conservative level. I mean, because even if we get to 190, we're talking another 100.
111, well, the information I was given was 180 just recently,
Okay.
but that would be $111 more. But the way it
times
was
how many kids in the
explained,
district.
the
3,300.
MSBO said if the
3,300.
3,300, okay. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just was going to say that they cautioned us because if she doesn't get the 45 cents to pass, the whole thing can fall apart.
Right.
And then you have
That's
to
all
start
linked
over.
together.
So it's very kind of terrifying to know, how much,
She's
how
linked her,
much.
she's linked her gas bill into this.
Yes.
Tax, whatever, but it is what it is. Thank you, so you answered that question. My second question, and I could be a little off on this, and this might be more for Ms. Pastor, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In the community service fund, I know that we had to change some things around last year, the way it was being reported with preschool and adult ed and everything else, so somewhere along the way, when we added the preschool to try to right the ship and almost zero out if it was capacity, I know we were at something like 100 grand in the hole last year, now I see 33,000 with everything involved.
Oh,
Is
sorry.
there a plan, I hate to say it, but with latchkey, are we gonna right this ship somehow with increased tuition? Do we have a plan to try to get tuition? The adult enrichment, have we offered less classes? Why are there less students? I mean, that seems to be a pretty big hit we're taking there.
So there's not, the latchkey in preschool self-funded. They actually did not cause the decrease. The decrease was in our enrichment classes this year. We did have a new person running enrichment, and interestingly enough, people entered into contracts that I'm not sure were fiscally responsible. I just met with them last week, and we talked about righting that ship and making sure that we're as Mr. Craig would say, we're considering all of our overhead costs before we're trying to give them a fair and equal split. So we are making changes in that. It doesn't make sense to offer the community classes and lose any money, even if it's $1. So we are looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Estheimer.
Hello, Barb, thank you so much. Could you just take a look here under the Special Education Fund? And if you've answered this, I'm sorry, I may have been researching something else and I didn't catch it, but I understand that we're at a zero for the incoming transfers. You budgeted at zero because
Yes.
we're awaiting, they're being reviewed by the Wayne County RESA the Deputy Superintendent. So
Yes.
what is that, what's your assumption on that number after the review? Does that match up with the amended 2018-19?
Well-
Or what does that look like?
So, since I'm new at this, I reached out to the deputy superintendent as far as the center program transfers. I was having some issues trying to figure out what was happening. And he did not feel they were reported correctly. So he has asked for,
In 18-19?
ever. He asked me for 8 years of our statements, and he is coming on July 2nd to meet with me and go over everything as far as the transfers in and the transfers out. Now, he's the one that reviews our entire Act 18 budget, but he never in the past would have looked at our financials. That his responsibility would have been done with the actual Act 18 budget that's turned in, and he goes over that with a fine-tooth comb. So I know that, he's comfortable with the numbers there. It's just he was taken aback a little bit by how these were reported. Like, for example, if you look at last year, the county millage, the Act 18 funds were $4,058,269. That transfer represents the difference between the cash we actually got from RESA in payments. So I moved all of that money up, the $4,900,729 is what my figure is in revenue for Act 18. If I'm doing something wrong, at this point, I don't think so, because he's pointed out that transfer, but he is going to take a look at that, and we'll have some more answers.
So basically, between that county millage Act 18 and incoming transfers, hopefully the review of those two will sort of level each other out, it appears, hopefully.
Yes.
And you'll get back to us as soon as you get that information?
Yes, definitely. I'll bring that back. And hopefully, the next Finance Committee would be a place to start.
Right. But if you're getting that information before then, if you could just share
Yes.
it with us. Because an $842,000 increase and a almost a $500,000 decrease, those are two areas of that special education fund revenue that we should keep an eye on, obviously. And then the second.
I'm gonna butt in on
Yeah,
that before you jump.
please.
Will that affect our 300,000 that we're counting on in the incoming into the general
Yes.
fund?
But my hope is it will be more.
Okay.
Because if you take the actual Act 18 budget, it shows, and this is what he kept saying, you're supposed to get $700,000 in indirect cost. In Act 18, we get reimbursed for everything. So he was very confused. So, as was I. And so we're trying to get to the bottom of this, but he's extremely busy and difficult to get a hold of. So he's been working with me as his time permits, and the very next time he can come will be next week.
So the 300 is an extremely conservative number?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, sorry.
And the last part of my, the last question I have, also in the special education fund, so the rent remained the same, and that's an incoming or an outgoing? Are somebody paying us rent, or are we paying somebody else rent?
Well, we're being paid rent by the county, and also, I think it's Wyandotte is paying us for the transitions program. We get $96,000 from RESA for the Beacon program rent, and it's reflected as an expense in the special education fund, of which it's an expense to their program, but they give us the cash for that.
For using our facilities?
Yes.
Now, is that, who determines that dollar amount? Is that
It's-
negotiated, is that a contractual?
It's, I'm not sure how often it's done, but I know that previous director used to do a calculation based on our expenses, and it has been stable for the last couple of years. So they have not asked for a revision, and my understanding is they come forward and ask us to revise our numbers, take a look at what the costs are again.
So do we have the guidance center on there?
The guidance center is up in the general fund, and it's
Okay.
just simply rental of the facility
That's
of
right.
North Point.
Okay, thanks.
I have one more question on Mr. Estheimer's comment about so the rent unchanged at 102,000. Do they cover the bills for that building, or do we?
We do. We bill, now Wyandotte, we bill them for the utilities, and then I don't believe we're including utilities. We may, and I apologize for that. I'm going to have to double check that
When
one.
you say Wyandotte, I don't know what you mean.
Wyandotte runs the transitions program.
Oh, I was assuming that the majority of this money was of the 102 is the rent payment at Beacon.
Well, 96,000 is for the Beacon program, and 6,000 is for the transitions program, which is run by Wyandotte.
Okay.
So we do bill them utilities.
We bill them utilities, but on the 96, are we billing back the Beacon program on the
That's what I need
utilities?
to check. I want to double check that.
I gotta assume a building like that's utilities have to run $40,000-$50,000 a year, and if we're paying that much and we're only getting 96 back, and then are they paying any part of the debt service on the millage that we redid when we did work there?
I do not believe so.
So I'm really concerned that, again, I brought this up time and time again, that we are not accumulating all of the costs associated with programs. Yeah, with outside programs. And it might look like, wow, we're getting $96,000 in rent, that's great. But if we're paying back 110, we're losing money on that deal. It doesn't seem to make sense. So I think that's something we really need to examine going forward. I realize it's not going to be fleshed out in this hearing process, but that's definitely something I think we need to pay attention to as part of that. Sorry, Mr. Esther, I think you had another question.
This would be my last question for right now. On the food service fund summary, Ms. Pastor added to the bottom sentence there, so new in January 2019, all 4 elementary, Asher and Beacon are free breakfast sites and lunch.
Yes.
That and lunch that would interpret to a revenue
Yes.
for us, correct?
Yes.
And do we have any assumption on what that looks like?
Well, that is.
That's not included, I know, in your budget, but
Well, it is, actually. The revenue that we have, let's see, what slide is it?
I think she's extremely conservative. We haven't realized a full year of it.
But
But
and-
you're looking at, that would be under that, either slide number 10 or 11, again, depending if you titled page 1 with a number, but
It should be, the food costs and the food summary that
That would
for
be
the
under total
free
revenue?
breakfast and lunch should show up under the federal sources. So he turns around and bills for the meals, and
well,
we
you
end up
just have
getting
that
it.
as a flat number right now.
I have it at, yes, I do. I have it pretty close. It's
Yeah.
like 784 because I had not had his billings for May and June yet,
Yeah.
because they weren't due at the time I had to do the budget. So
So if we're doing
then-
free lunch there, that could, we could see, a couple of these areas I pointed out, we could see some positive, positive, meaning good,
Well,
to our budget.
after this was turned in, he sent us a note that he hit $100,000 in billings for May, which is the first time he's ever, and, they've ever done that. So, Ms. Pastor is correct, that most likely this figure is really on the low side again also.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So that could adjust up the 39,000 that we have transferring in. If that amount goes up, we could transfer in an additional
well,
35, something, whatever, up to the 70, and then the remaining amount would end up in fund balance.
In a
for-
food service
I
fund
understand
balance,
for
correct.
food service. Okay. So we could see a slight increase in our incoming transfers into the general fund from that.
Yes.
Okay. So the community service fund, we changed that, and we've pulled it out to be its own entity now. Is that considered an enterprise fund, or is it still just an earmarked part of the general fund? So it's not really its own fund, we're just earmarking it.
Correct. They call it special revenue fund. So, they've started adding more and more, they meaning the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, directing us to move these funds into a separate fund, which actually is probably a good idea, because then they're self-supporting.
I've been asking for it for a long time, and Gadsby's just catching up.
So now we have, the entire, with preschool over there, as far as all of the individual efforts, all within the same fund. And it's much easier to see, the cost, the revenue and the expenditures pulled out into this one fund.
So, yeah, I see that the revenues and expenditures are pulled out, but I think we're still not accounting for expenditures we're still not costing them out any overhead, correct?
Correct.
So we're, in a sense, we're making this look better than it really is, because we haven't associated all of the cost to this program. Because by not putting anything in, it's losing 33,000. Is that right?
Yes.
And so that number gets worse as we start associating the appropriate costs to it. For example, they're not paying any kind of rent or any kind of utilities or
Correct.
seeing any indirect costs coming back to the general fund for administration, for HR processes, for budgeting processes, for payroll, IT services. Like, we don't see any of that being recouped.
No, but what the state figures is that's part of our unrestricted at 11 point, the figure I used was 11.46. It's been bumped to 11.75. That's what they consider all of those costs to be. Now, whether it really truly is,
But it hasn't been applied to this fund. Even the 11 point something hasn't been applied to this fund.
no, what it is pulled out in the way of their total expenses, we get to take 11.75% of their total expenses and bump that back to our revenue as indirect costs that we've captured from the fund.
Could we see it in the future on this, illustrated within the fund? That 11%, just so we can do the math a little bit more
Well, that's
clear?
represented in the 35,000, right?
Yes,
See, it's.
on the
but-
expenditure slide.
But basically, what you're saying, what the state would be saying then in the 11% is that 35,000 covers all of central office's participation in this program, all of our IT services participation in this program, rent, utilities, and that doesn't even account for any kind of a risk that we have, if we, insurance.
Correct.
35 is not a.
Well, and
I appreciate
will-
I appreciate that's what the state says you should use as a number, but I don't think it's realistic.
No, I will want to say that is not the full 11%, though. That is what's left for us to take. So sometimes we're not able to realize the full amount because they didn't make enough overall funds, between the three programs. There wasn't enough to take the full amount that we should be entitled to.
Well, that's a matter of opinion. I would say the full amount we're entitled to is our actual costs,
Well-
not the number of 11%, which is what the state says to apply to. And the state's not specific about the enterprise fund or special revenue funds. It's just saying that's the general
Yep.
number you should use for the indirect cost.
It's
Which,
true.
okay. So, I'm gonna mark that as something else I wanna look further into as we try to, I'm gonna say make some corrections to the budget as some of our facts get hardened up and we get firm numbers on where we're at. Another question I had, what did we actually lose in student count last year?
From fall, it was 180
From the
previous,
previous year? We lost 180?
but it's a blended count.
Right.
And I don't know what the blended count is because Teresa always said something
Because of the FTEs and the way we account for the different types of students that we have, we don't just have general students, right? We have,
But we get 90% of the FTE allowance on our first count day, and we get 10% on our second count day. The 23A students are very different. We collect that money by month, so it's very different. So for example, this month, we're 50-plus 23A students, but because that number fluctuates, and we always have more in the summer than we have, and this is our first full year trying that, we were conservative on those numbers as well.
so we feel that 200 is a conservative number, or it might be a fairly accurate number?
No, I think we're fair, I'm pretty, I feel pretty accurate at 200.
200 is an accurate number, so it's not necessarily a conservative number.
No, I think we're going to be,
So 250 would be a conservative number, but 200 is more of an accurate guess at what we're actually going to lose in students.
I figured she was conservative on everything else. I wanted to be accurate on.
Be accurate on that? Right.
And I did get some documentation from the Michigan Treasury, and he sent me a nice little spreadsheet of, was it 10 or 20-year trend?
On our fund balance.
No, on our students.
Oh,
Remember, I was
yeah.
telling you that? It was averaging about 200 a year is what
Right.
they reflected. So, I mean, that's a very solid number.
Right, and I do realize that the projections are conservative as far as how much we're getting in an increase into the state foundation per student. But I have real concerns that we're almost cutting our fund balance in half. That's a very concerning thing for me. And I recognize that we have to pass a budget tonight. We don't really have a choice but to pass a budget tonight, but I would really like to start seeing the breakdowns of where everything is and how it's being spent. And I'm going to ask for the board, just because, for me, it's a little simpler if I can see, rather than seeing the funds and the codes, and it's easier for me if I can see it by school almost. If I can say, what is this building, what is central office, how many people do we have, how many positions is that, what are those positions?
We almost have to
like
do that right now.
Almost like an organizational chart, but with some names and numbers on it, I guess.
Asking for that for a long time.
Yeah, I think if we had an organizational chart with some names and numbers on it, I think that would help us.
For building and then match it up with the bigger picture. of
Right,
it
yeah,
all.
because I'm constantly asking myself, what are we doing differently than other districts are doing? And here we are showing, cutting our fund balance almost half, and I understand it's conservative. So if these numbers come through like we're talking, then that's a big increase to what we are, and then we're not cutting so deep. But I guess for myself, it would help me to understand what are we doing right at each building, what are we doing wrong at each building or each program, so that we can analyze those programs and see how they really do affect our overall bottom line.
So I just want to remind you that the board requested or agreed to allow Rod Green to come in to do that, to look at our budget and give us some information. And I have a meeting with him next Tuesday morning to talk about the process and how that is going to look. And I think that will help getting an outside set of eyes on our overall spending.
Yeah, and just for me, there's so many moving parts and pieces. There's the student count, there's the state foundation allowance, we have grant money coming and going and all the time, so it would help me to see what parts of our, and then when you look at, when we look at our budget, I can see that's basic programs, and it's $18 million, right? I got $18 million in basic programs, but I don't know how that rolls out over each building, and how does that roll out over each program, and that would help me to know what is that going into, and how our sources of revenue come back and reimburse that. So
And
it would help me to understand it a little bit deeper as we bring in other people who can explain it to us. That they might look at that 18 million, oh yeah, that's this and this and this, but for me to see it broken down a little bit simpler would be very helpful, so that I can understand how all the numbers add up across and then down again, so that we can see. again, what we're being successful at, what are we doing right, and what are we doing wrong? So.
And then, did we discuss maybe seeing the budget as it's in progress every quarter to look at it and see what the changes, so we don't see a big difference, when we see the actual budget?
Right, yeah, I think that was one of our things we had kind of focused on last year. I think Dr. Pomponio's right, is,
With your
and I
budget.
realize we've had a changeover in staff, so, but that was one of the things is we wanted to see, quarterly, where are we standing in relation to what we had budgeted.
So we can stop or make some changes and
Yeah.
adjustments.
Right. So,
If I could also just mention that for 1920, one of the new things or requirements that we have with the advent of ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, we, for 1920, are in like a warning year where we have to report by building so that they can break down by student. And it's mandatory for 2020 to 2021. So during this next year, we're going to be converting our account numbers over so that you'll get a better picture also of what each student costs at each building.
see, we're ahead of the game on that one, too. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's, I mean, just for us as people who are not in that budget every day and seeing it every day, it helps us understand what process that goes through at each building. And again, I'm going to say to each program, so that we can see how each program represents a number back into our general fund and our overall picture, so that we can make sure we're doing our job in monitoring the health of that budget, and that something's not getting away from us in one position or another. So, okay.
Through the chair, I have two
Mr.
more.
Morris.
So in kind of that same line, and I may not be using the right words here, but understanding marginal costs. So right now, we don't have the problem where we're getting too many students. That's unfortunately not what we're facing. But understanding in a building and in a room what our costs are to educate a child, so that if for some reason, so that we can optimize the number of kids and staff in any building, any room or any building, right? So that, does that make sense what I'm asking already? Or if not, feel free to challenge me, because what I'm trying to do is make sure that we're using our assets, our people and our physical assets as efficiently as possible. So there's a number to run a building. Here's how much it costs to run a building with 2 students. Here's what the number is with 200 students. It's our people and operational costs, our heating, every cost that is attached to a building and a function. And if we don't know that, then we don't know our business. And I'm not throwing this in your lap. I know I'm not insinuating that you've caused this problem by any stretch. But if we don't know that, then we don't know our business, and we can't run our business. And that's, if that makes sense. So
Yes.
I know you can't derive that tomorrow morning, but if we can start thinking about that and being able to paint the picture to us in a way that reflects that, I think it'll help us make better decisions. Am I
That's
crazy?
what
No,
you're-
that's exactly what I've been asking for
Perfect.
a long time is, what's the cost to educate that one more child? What's that?
I mean-
And I understand that's the harder thing to come across. I think once we get those buildings broken down, then it makes a little bit more sense, and that's what, see, like, we wouldn't know if one building is costing 40% more to heat than another, but, because we just get all these in as costs. It doesn't really come across, it doesn't get analyzed that way, so there may be some problem that we're not catching because of the way we lump everything together, and it just, I guess, smooths out or averages out is the way of doing it, so that's what I was hoping to see as well. Dr. Pomponio.
I noticed that in here for the general fund expenditures, you have the reduction in curriculum and maintenance costs
Yes.
from enhancement. So is that what we set aside for their budget?
Yes.
Okay, so that is in there as their budget.
You talking about from the last meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's something different in this meeting to go into this budget this year,
Oh, so
not to
is
next.
that,
Not next year's, it's gonna be into this one. I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
no,
but
I know that, I'm just saying, so that would be taken out of their fund, which is the reduction that you're stating, that's,
200,000 is for curriculum that had sort of been set aside out of the enhancement dollars.
that's what I'm saying, she already set it aside.
Right.
So when I reviewed after last week, looking at everything, and Michelle's proposal, Dr. Baker Herring's proposal was really for technology and not really curriculum. And so looking at our leftover bond dollars, we actually have in excess of $200,000. So my proposal is to sort of set that curriculum money as a placeholder. And if we find out we're in a little bit of trouble in the fall, we might not have to spend that money in curriculum, but rather we would spend bond dollars to get those, to get the Chromebooks in teachers' hands, because they're going to be using open resources for curriculum.
Perfect.
So I think it's a win-win, and although she set the money aside, my preference is not to bring you anything major until we find out what we're getting.
Okay, good.
So it would be a little bit of a, there would be a $350,000 cushion.
So it's accomplishing what would have been done, but in this budget with bond money rather than next year with.
That's
curriculum.
perfect. That's perfect. Thank you.
Through the chair, I have one more simple question, and then I have a request. One is on the food service fund summary. There's a comment that said food costs are at industry standard of 40%.
Yes.
Can you just tell me what that means?
The state of Michigan believes we should be food costs at 40%. And every year, we have a report called the FID, which is the Financial Information Database. We get kickbacks if we're not about 40% in actual food costs. They don't want us to be higher, they don't want us to be lower. It's really a challenge to keep it right
40%
about
of
that.
what?
40% of our total costs.
So for a food service, for the food services that we provide, so
Yes.
labor and equipment and all that stuff, what they're saying is that the food itself,
The food itself should only be about 40%.
cost for the food should be 40%. Okay, so it's kind of, whether it's right or not, that's a state guidance.
Yes.
Got it.
Industry standard, 40%, pretty much.
Okay, oh, I see, okay, I got it, I
Oh,
got it.
yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm
Stress
not in
timer
that
would know
business,
that.
yeah, now I get it, okay, I connected the
Yes.
dots. And then, would it be inappropriate, and this is a question for the board and for the administration, to do a scenario, so we're at $69, right? That's the number you've chosen to use to be careful, correct?
Yes.
Would it be inappropriate to run the same scenario, a different scenario with 2 or 3 of the other numbers that could potentially end up as our budget number, right? And that
Yes.
way we'll have some picture in our brain as to where that change would be. Is it a big deal to do that?
300.
No,
You figured everything at 69, can you figure it at 180 or whatever the number is you guys decide to do?
I already did it. 3,300 at 100, you're gonna be $370,000 if we get the governor's proposal of 180.
Right.
With 3,300 kids, times that $111, instead of 69, we'd be at about 350,000.
And
So
then
that-
hoping they don't take it from
That goes,
somewhere else.
right, that goes into
Right.
the general, that would go into the general fund, 350, 360, if that passes at that number.
But they can always take it from somewhere else, as is the
As a
state's.
strategy.
And if we're
to get it.
The
conservative
state's strategy is to,
with the curriculum money, we
Recharge
might
us whatever they
need
get.
that for fund
Yep,
balance.
yep.
Do what?
If we're conservative with the curriculum money, we could use that if we have to, as a
Right.
last resort, so.
But would it be easy to report to us in a second slide with those numbers as well? If it's a ridiculous exercise, say so, but that way we get an idea. If our number is this, here's our problem. If our number is this, here's our problem, and so on.
Do you
Does
wanna
that make
know-
sense?
well, but we have to make an assumption in this budget, because this
Right,
budget is
for the
a formal
purposes of this
doc- yeah,
budget, but
yeah.
overall for our planning purposes, correct. Yeah, for what we have here, I get that.
Sure.
All
I
right,
can,
thank-
I can do a slide, just a slide, and send it to you all of, if we get $69, this is what it is, this is our bottom line. If we get 180, this is what our revenue would be, this is the bottom fund balance.
If it's easy to.
Do 495 just for fun, too.
How much? Oh, 495?
While we're living in made-up numbers, right?
If we're just doing made-up
I-
numbers, do 495.
Thank you very
mean,
much.
that's
Thank
Well,
you,
that's
Barbara.
not really a made-up number, that's the governor's
That was the
proposal
high
of
end
what we
Right.
would get, if she has it plus the incentive on it.
Right, but we've had this before where we're getting this increase, but yet they take it from another revenue source, so it does balance back out.
Just depends on-
Whatever they call it, they love to call it an increase to the foundation allowance.
Yes.
And then they sneak it back through some other charge or fund.
Yeah.
And they just washed it through us, but they increased the foundation allowance.
We did.
But
Just
Yes.
depends.
Let's stress
But what
that
we
part out.
actually saw in in our pocket was.
What a bottom line.
Yeah, that's the hard part we're not seeing that other, it's the give without the take, and we can pretend about the give all we want, but
That's right.
we know the take exists, so that's what we gotta figure out. So any other questions? Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll go ahead and, we'll close the 2019-2020 budget hearing. And then we'll move on to, if I can find my agenda, move on to consent. Okay, consent agenda consists of minutes from June 11, 2019 regular board meeting and June 18, 2009 work session, and the HR update.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Estheimer. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Dr. Pomponio. Any discussion on that? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Now we're on to action item number 1, which is the approval of the original budget for 2019-2020.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve the 2018-2019 original budgets for the General Operating Fund, Special Education Center Program Fund, Food Service Fund, Community Services Fund, and the Student School Activity Fund as presented.
There's a typo. I'm sorry, it should say 2019-20 budget.
Oh, did I say 2018?
You said it, but it's typed that way.
Okay, I'm
So if
sorry.
you could change, I'm sorry.
I just
I just
read
want to
it.
make sure this is right.
Do you want to amend your motion, Dr.
I'd like to
Pomponio?
amend my motion to make a motion to approve the 2019-2020 original budgets for the General Operating Fund, Special Education Center Program Fund, Food Service Fund, Community Services Fund, and Student School Activity Fund as presented.
Okay, a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support? Support. Supported by Mr. Lamas. Any discussion on the item? Screen?
Obviously, this is something, this budget is something we have to approve, but, so I want to make it clear that this is something that if things don't change, we need to make some changes ourselves. I think that's important to note up here.
I'm going to echo that sentiment, that, yeah, I am approving this budget as well. I'm going to support this. But when those numbers do come through, we are going to have to change this, because I'm not really willing to go forward a whole year looking at cutting our fund balance in half and dipping below the 5%. So whatever that means, we're going to have to live within our means, whatever that is.
I agree with you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Just if there's any lack of clarity, the state has not approved of the budget, so that's why we are in this state of limbo right now.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Action item number 2 is approval of issuance of August 2019 state aid note. Who's presenting this?
I am, and attached is the resolution authorizing the issuance of the August 2019 state aid note for an amount not to exceed $3.8 million. It is an annual resolution. The amount is slightly higher than the current state aid note, which is $3.6 million. And the reason for that is that our note counsel wanted to have more time to look at our cash flow numbers. She felt that possibly I was conservative there as well, and so I showed our cash flow at about $3.71 million at the end of May. And I told her the reasoning was because I was extremely conservative in the amount of state aid. I would have still borrowed 3.6 million, and she felt more comfortable leaving it at 3.8. We can always come in and borrow 3.6 with the actual application, but I feel fairly comfortable with the 3.8. It's a slight increase overall. The funds are required to meet our cash flow needs throughout the year, which our lowest points are typically in May and June.
So So are you proposing the 3.6 or the 3.8? Because I'm seeing 3.6 on the, or is there an agenda?
There was a,
Oh,
You
there was
missed
a
that, buddy.
Right here.
updated sheet?
There's
Okay.
an update.
Ah, that makes
The
sense.
employee of the
All right,
month.
she didn't.
okay.
I gave it to him, but I guess.
No, it's here. I have it in my collection. Okay. That makes more sense.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you.
Yes, after talking with her, she felt that she wanted me to change it, and she did the resolution at 3.8 million.
And this is really just for cash flow purposes.
Correct.
It's borrowing it so we can pay it out and
It's
then,
paid back in 1 year, in August of 2020, out of our state aid proceeds.
right. Okay.
Through the chair, I'd like to make a motion
Mr. Lamas.
to approve the resolution authorizing the issuance of the August 2019 note in anticipation of state school aid, in parentheses, August 2019 through the Michigan Finance Authority, end paren, for an amount not to exceed 3.8 million as presented.
Question.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mr. Lamas. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Dr. Pomponio. Any discussion on the item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Okay, and then we have action item number 3, which is direction to the superintendent. This was kind of discussed at our work session, so we don't really have anybody to present this item. This is just coming from the board to the superintendent.
May I say something? So I just passed around a bright yellow piece of paper. So I got together with Mr. Kokoski from Plant Moran Cressa and set aside 4 potential dates. I knew that if we picked people and then tried to get dates, it's almost impossible, so we preset 4. And then thought if there's since we can only have 3 Board of Education members, I thought everyone could give me the hot topics at the bottom in order to give their the things that they're passionate about in order for the bond committee to consider that in our discussions, so.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and with that, then I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on action item number 3.
I move to direct the superintendent to form a committee to review the scope of a potential bond proposal. The committee may consist of up to 3 board members, or, I'm sorry, 3 members from each of the following groups: Board of Education, Administration, other employees, citizens, and Plant Moran Cressa.
Okay, I have a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Green. Any discussion on the item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. And action item number 4 is the approval of the purchase of Chromebooks.
You're being asked to approve the purchase of Chromebook carts for 6 through 12 math teachers and 9 through 12 science teachers for $1,054,748.60. These funds would be from the remaining bond dollars set aside for technology purchases. These Chromebooks would be used by the math and science teachers to help utilize open educational resources, also called OER, to support teaching and learning.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on item number 4.
I make a motion to approve the purchase of 6th through 12th grade math and 9th through 12th grade science Chromebook carts to be purchased from the dedicated bond technology fund.
Okay, I have a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Lamas. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Action item number 5 is the approval of 1-year extension of the bread contract. Who's presenting this one?
You're being asked to, so I agreed to do this because somebody was working on the budget proposal, so I
Okay.
took this on. You're being asked to approve a 1-year contract extension for Aunt Millie's Bakery. This recommendation comes from Mark Rodriguez and is part of the Southeast Wayne County Buying Cooperative Group. So he attached a memo as a sample of what he said to them for Wyandotte and Lincoln Park.
Mr.
So this is a, oh, sorry, one question.
ahead.
So this is something that they've already bid out, and we're just taking the benefit of that consortium's bid.
Correct.
Okay.
Basically, the next three are all consortium-type bidding.
Right, okay. Mr. Lamas?
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I lied. It's just Berkshire, Berkshire Dairy and Aunt Millie's, the Cottage Inn he just did for Southgate.
Okay.
Sorry.
So any other questions for staff on action item number 5? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on item number 5.
I make a motion to approve the one-year extension of the bread contract with Aunt Millie's Bakery through the 2019-2020 school year.
I have a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Green. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Okay, action item number 6 is the approval of a one-year extension of the milk contract.
You're being asked to approve a one-year contract extension for Berkshire Dairy. This recommendation comes from Mark Rodriguez and is part of the Southeast Wayne County Buying Cooperative Group.
Okay. Any questions for staff? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on action item number 6.
Make a motion to approve the one-year extension of the milk contract with Berkshire Dairy through 2019-2020 school year.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Estheimer. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Dr. Pomponio. Any discussion on the item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Action item number 7 is approval of a one-year extension of the pizza contract.
You're being asked to approve a one-year contract extension for Cottage Inn Gourmet Pizza. This recommendation comes from Mark Rodriguez.
It doesn't have the amount that we have in the
There's
letter-
no
at least not that I
addition
can
to
see.
what we paid, so so I believe it's 7.25. So we originally had Domino's at $7.50,
It was at 5 something, wasn't it?
oh, maybe $5.50, and then he rebid it for $5.25.
Because this is just for the elementary school.
It's just for the elementary schools. They make their own pizza at Davidson and Anderson.
Anderson, okay. All right.
It's the same price. He didn't include it. I'm sorry, I didn't ask.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on action item number 7.
Make a motion to approve the one-year extension of the pizza contract with Cottage Inn Gourmet Pizza through the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay, I have a motion by Dr. Pomponio. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Lamas. Any discussion on the item? Dr. Pomponio.
I've spoken with several elementary students, and they said that this is a good switch from Domino's to Cottage Inn, so
Okay,
that was good feedback.
all right. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion does pass. Takes us to employee representatives. Are there any employee representatives here who would like to speak tonight? Okay, seeing none, move to action item J, or I'm sorry, not action item J, just item J, information and announcements. Is there anyone who has information and announcements tonight?
Want to wish everybody a safe and happy 4th of July. Couple weeks here before our next meeting, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Can I just announce that we will be in our new location and be ready to receive the public hopefully next Monday. We will have a flag to represent where our new central office location and a few signs so parents can find us next week. And if any of you would like to come by and see, hopefully our boxes will be unpacked. So,
Thank you very much. Anyone else who has anything?
Does the board have access to the office? Is it the key fob that works with the?
so there's currently no key fob there. That is one of the door replacements. So Ray Haven has the doors on order, and once the new doors are in, then we'll put the key fob system that's part of the Michigan State Police grant, and add the camera buzz-in system, which we hope to have by the time school starts.
Sounds good, thank you.
Right now, I'd call ahead.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Text when you get there, Will.
Right.
Right, I had to,
Right.
yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion by Mr. Estheimer, supported by Mr. Green. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
That's July 1st, Monday, right?
Yes.